Have you ever listened to Korean and thought, wait, why does the P sound like P instead of B? Or maybe when you're watching a K-drama, you hear 네, yes, but it sounds more like 대. Or you've wondered why 기억 sometimes sounds more like K, but other times more like G. If you've ever had these questions, you're not imagining things. In fact, you're noticing something that almost every Korean learner experiences. The good news is that Korean pronunciation isn't random or inconsistent. The real reason it sounds confusing is much simpler. Korean has its own sound system. That means many Korean sounds don't have a perfect English equivalent, and that's completely normal. Your brain is simply trying to fit Korean sounds into the sound categories of your native language. Today, I'll show you why that happens, and more importantly, how to train your ears to hear Korean the way native speakers do. Before learning Korean, your brain has spent years organizing sounds. For example, English speakers clearly separate sounds like B and P, D and T, G and K. When you hear one of these sounds, your brain instantly knows which category it belongs to. But Korean doesn't organize its sounds the same way. Korean speakers don't hear English sounds like B, P, D, or T. They hear Korean consonants like 비읍, 디귿, 기역, and 니은. So when you first hear Korean, your brain automatically asks, which English sound is this closest to? But that's the wrong question. The better question is, which Korean consonant am I hearing? Let's see what that means. Take this syllable, 파. Listen carefully. 파. Many English speakers hear something close to 파. Now listen to this word, 이불. Many learners hear 이불. So naturally they ask, why does 비읍 sound like P in one place and B in another? Here's the important part. It isn't exactly English P and it isn't exactly English B either. 비읍 is a Korean sound. At the beginning of a word, many English speakers hear it as being closer to P. Between vowels, they often hear it as being closer to B. This is simply how 비읍 is naturally pronounced in Korean. Korean speakers aren't switching between two different consonants. They simply hear 비읍. Your brain is the one trying to fit it into an English category. Now you might be wondering, if 비읍 isn't exactly B or P, then how is it different from 피읍? Great question. Listen to these two words, 바람, 파랑. To many beginners, they sound very similar, especially when spoken naturally in everyday conversation. But Korean speakers hear two completely different consonants, 비읍 in 바람 and 피읍 in 파랑. One easy way to notice the difference is the amount of air. Try saying these words with your hand in front of your mouth. 파랑. You should feel a strong puff of air on your hand. Now say 바람. There's much less air, so although 비읍 may sound closer to P to English speakers depending on where it appears, 피읍 is a completely different Korean consonant. Let's try a quick listening exercise. I'm gonna say 4 Korean words. Don't think about English spelling. Don't ask yourself, was that B or P? Just listen. 바다, 보다, 가방, 신발. Did some sound closer to P? Did others sound closer to B? That's perfectly normal, but they all contain the same Korean consonant, 비읍. The goal isn't to decide whether you heard B or P. The goal is to recognize 비읍. Now, let's look at another consonant, 디귿. Listen to this syllable, 다, 다. Many learners hear something like 타. Now compare it to 바다. This time, many learners hear the second syllable closer to 다. So they ask, is tigut sometimes T and sometimes D? Just like 비읍, it isn't exactly English T or D. It's the Korean consonant, tigut. Just like 비읍, many English speakers hear tigut differently depending on where it appears. But Korean speakers still hear the same consonant. The same thing happens with 기억. Listen to 가. Many learners hear something closer to 가. Now compare it to 아기. Many learners hear something closer to 아기. So they ask, is 기억 sometimes K and sometimes G? Just like before, it isn't exactly English K and it isn't exactly English G. It's simply the Korean consonant, 기억. Just like 비읍 and 디귿, your ears are trying to match it to the closest English sound. Here's another question I hear all the time. When I watch K-dramas, why does yes in Korean, 네, sound like 대? The answer is, native speakers are still saying 네. But depending on the speaker, the speed, and your listening experience, many learners perceive the initial 니은 as sounding closer to D. Again, this doesn't mean Koreans are changing their pronunciation. It's another example of your brain trying to match a Korean sound to the closest English one. As you hear more Korean, you will gradually stop asking yourself, was that D or N? And simply recognize the Korean consonant, 니은. Romanization can certainly make this more confusing. When you see letters like B, P, D, and G, your brain immediately thinks of English sounds. But Korean letters don't represent English sounds. They represent Korean sounds. Romanization is only an approximation. It can't perfectly show you how Korean sounds. That's why learning Hangul is so helpful. Instead of thinking about English letters, you begin recognizing Korean consonants like 비읍, 디귿, and 기억. Here's something you can start practicing today. The next time you hear Korean, don't ask, was that B or P? Ask, was that 비읍? Don't ask, was that D or T? Ask, was that 디귿? Don't ask, was that G or K? Ask, was that 기억? This simple change trains your brain to hear Korean as Korean, instead of trying to match every sound to English. At first, you may still notice that Korean sounds are somewhere between the English sounds you know. That's normal. The goal isn't to force Korean into English categories. The goal is to build new Korean sound categories in your brain. Listen carefully, imitate what you hear, and with enough exposure, your brain will naturally recognize these Korean sounds more easily. So if Korean doesn't sound the way you expected, don't worry. You're not hearing Korean wrong. You're hearing Korean through the sounds you're already familiar with. The more you listen to Korean, the easier it becomes to recognize Korean sounds naturally. One day, you won't be wondering, was that B or P? You will simply hear 비읍. And that's a big step toward sounding more natural in Korean. If there's another Korean sound that's confused you, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next lesson. 다음에 또 만나요.